Akira Toriyama is a legendary mangaka most renowned for his works Dragon Ball and Chrono Trigger. But there are actually other well-written and finely drawn manga he has created, like the manga called Sandland. It's one of his lesser-known works that still manifests his unique art style, which has greatly influenced the next generation of artists. In honor of the late great legend Akira Toriyama, here is the brief but compelling story of Sandland. Somewhere in the midst of a desert landscape, in the far, far future, Beelzebub, the prince of the underworld, was playing with a Game Boy alongside his two pets, a bug-like demon and a ferret demon. Meanwhile, Gremlin the Centaur was just chilling at the back. Their game was abruptly interrupted when they were called upon by another companion, a small flying demon with an antenna. What they'd been waiting for have finally arrived, so the prince and his crew mounted Gremlin's back to chase after a vehicle. Gremlin sprinted swiftly and they quickly caught up to the vehicle. The prince leaped onto the vehicle's hood, carrying his bug-like demon pet, to the surprise of the human drivers. It seemed this wasn't the first time the humans had been raided by demons. One of the demons pulled out the engine cables from under the hood, effectively stopping the vehicle. Gremlin spotted some containers filled with water at the back of the trunk. However, the humans wouldn't surrender their water to them that easily, so one of them pulled out a gun and fought back. He shot Beelzebub, but only hurting him mildly, because demons cannot be killed by regular bullets. What they needed was holy water. Before they could splash the prince with holy water from a holy water gun, his ferret charged at the human and sliced the water gun in half with a sickle. Being a demon of Japanese origin, he holds no regard to the sanctity of their holy water. After securing a few containers of water, they all left. The prince told the humans to stop crying since they had only taken a little from them. Raiding the human king's water supply would have been more worthwhile in terms of time and effort. But the problem was, doing so might result in many human casualties, and they didn't want to exterminate the human race as it would make their lives too boring. Then, the prince noticed a child as small as himself, looking thirsty and envious of the water he was drinking. The bug-like demon asked what he would do with the child. The prince left a box of water bottles from their earlier haul and gave it to the child. His act of kindness towards humans was relentlessly teased by his companions until they returned home. Indeed, water is a precious resource in a hot, dry desert. Upon returning, the prince distributed the water among the demons. An elderly demon mentioned to the prince that they had lost one of their own while waiting for water. A slime had dried up after being exposed to the sun for too long. After this, the prince was left to contemplate alone. He harbored resentment and anger towards the sun for making their lives excessively difficult. For 50 years, the condition of the entire Earth had been like this. Deserts dominated the landscape, and humans were blamed for constantly engaging in wars. Even as the world turned into a desert, the ceaseless wars continued. The wars devastated forests and dried up many bodies of water, nearly depleting billions of lives. And to worsen matters, the lands never tasted rain again. Due to the extreme dryness of the current climate, the king of humans announced that in order to help, he decided to have his kingdom sell a bottle of water for only $900 instead of $1,000. The king monopolized the only spring in the entire country and profited greatly from it. This greatly infuriated the prince, prompting him to throw his bottle in anger. Suddenly, a visitor arrived in a vehicle, an old human man with Sheriff written on the side of his vehicle. His name is Sheriff Rao, and he wishes to speak with the leader of the demons. He needed their help, so Beelzebub went to meet him. The prince admired his courage for coming alone to their demon territory. Sheriff Rao wanted to speak with their king, Satan, but he has already entrusted such matters to the prince. Sheriff Rao sought help to find the location of the mystic spring, believing it was near their desert. The prince found it hard to believe that a spring existed in their bone-dry desert. However, since Rao had seen water finches yesterday, he believed a spring was nearby. Water finches are birds that feed on small fish from fresh streams, and they come from the south, which is the direction Rao intended to search. He pleaded for a demon to accompany him for safety, as it was too dangerous to go alone. In exchange for the information and company, he would share the water they found. Demons could even live by the spring if they wished, as long as humans had constant access to the water. The corrupt king had no idea about this, and they had no plans to inform him. The prince and the elderly demon carefully considered this. The pros: the demons would never die of thirst again. The cons: it was risky if the king found out, and they were unsure if they could trust a human. To further persuade the demons, he gifted them a PlayStation console inclusive of games like Dragon Quest XIII. The prince was thrilled, immediately running to his father to ask for permission. His father allowed it, deeming the human trustworthy and considering it a good activity for the prince, beneficial for the demons as well. However, his father warned that upon his return, he could only play the PlayStation for 1 hour per day. Sheriff Rao was delighted to learn the Demon King had permitted the prince to join him. With their provisions and bedding packed, they could bring another companion. When Beelzebub had to choose a demon to accompany them, all others fled, leaving the elderly demon Sheaf as his choice. Sheaf complained about not being a strong demon, but the prince said he was smart and skilled in thievery. So they prepared for the journey without delay. But before boarding the vehicle, Sheaf attempted to flee again, suggesting it would be better to bring a flying demon instead. The prince retorted that he knew the others were useless, so Sheaf shouldn't fuss. The demons teased Sheaf, but the prince scolded them. They should be ready when called upon and not touch his PlayStation. Since everything was ready, they left immediately. The prince was excited about the adventure, but I can't say the same for the elderly demon who sulked throughout the journey. According to Sheriff Rao, it would take them about 5 days to reach their destination. It seemed it would be a boring trip for the mischievous prince. To alleviate some of the prince's boredom, he asked Rao to teach him how to drive a vehicle. And like a mischievous, unruly child, he drove the vehicle very fast. For some reason, Sheaf was also interested in trying out driving, so he briefly took over the steering wheel. Like the prince, he too enjoyed driving fast and was thrilled. The two demons took turns driving, while Rao, who was chilling in the back, let them be. However, there was a problem. Our sheriff spotted a familiar hole. He immediately alerted the two, as they were all in danger now. And then, a massive monster suddenly emerged from the ground behind them. A powerful dragon. None of them were capable of combating it, so they hurriedly drove away. But since the vehicle couldn't outpace the dragon's speed, they had no choice but to unload the rear compartment where their supplies were stored. Because of this, the vehicle's top speed increased, and they managed to escape from the dragon. Though their supplies were depleted, what mattered was that they were still alive. While the two demons argued over who was the better driver, Sheriff Rao was worried about their survival, as they now had no water, food, or gas. Our three main guys are now caught in a very complicated situation. Sheaf suggested that they go back and restock, but according to Sheriff Rao, they would still be short on fuel for the return journey, so they couldn't do that. So, he decided to take them to the nearest village, which was only an hour away. Sheriff Rao was familiar with the roads in the area because he always traveled for his job. However, when he found out that the prince was already 2,500 years old, he realized that he was just a mere child compared to his demon companions. Therefore, he asked them if the stories about the earth being in better condition before it became a desolate wasteland were true. But the prince said that even though the earth was actually nicer before, humans still had more problems compared to demons. Sheriff Rao always believed that demons were more problematic and troubled than the humans, but in reality, demons haven't even killed any human. In all of human history, every misfortune was blamed on demons, but in truth, humans were the real culprits. Sheriff Rao began to think that maybe all this time, humans had misunderstood demons. However, Beelzebub made it clear that he still shouldn't think that demons were kind beings. They are still very mischievous, and not too long ago, they had raided a water delivery truck, and it had been a long time since he last brushed his teeth. In the prince's entire life, although he had not killed a single human, he had knocked out a lot of them. But Sheriff Rao admitted to them that, unlike them, he had killed many humans. Sheaf and the prince were shocked by this. Even though Rao explained that he did it because of the war, the demons couldn't hide their fear. The job Sheriff Rao referred to earlier was being part of an army. He was actually a war veteran, Finally, they were nearing the closest town. However, a bandit lookout spotted them and alerted his companions that they had new prey to capture. It had been 10 days since they last had a victim. They set up a spike trap to flatten the tires of the vehicle. It worked, and all 4 tires were flattened. Then, the whole group of bandits confronted them. They greatly angered Sheriff Rao, who did not show even an ounce of being intimidated. Meanwhile, the 2 demons simply laughed at the bandits' ridiculous outfits. The bandits charged at Sheriff Rao, so he drew his pair of batons. The movements of our war veteran clearly showed he was an expert in close-range combat, both in defense and offense. Sheriff Rao alone held them all off, impressing the 2 demons. But since these bandits were naturally wicked, their leader decided to use a revolver. A bandit landed a blow on Sheriff Rao's back, and before the enemies could severely injure him, the prince decided to join the fight. He told the bandits that nothing could be worse than a demon like him, before striking the bandits' leader hard. This easily intimidated the bandits. They couldn't hit him because he was quick to counterattack. And indeed, he moved and attacked very swiftly. The prince eliminated all of them and allowed none to escape. Sheriff Rao thanked him for the help and was impressed by the prince's combat skills. But the prince said those bandits were just weak opponents. What puzzled the prince more was why Sheriff Rao didn't use the gun holstered to his belt. The sheriff only used his gun as a deterrent because it was very hard to find ammo for it. Now, they had no choice but to carry their belongings and walk to the town since the vehicle was no longer operable. Fortunately, they were close to reaching it. Before proceeding, Sheriff Rao asked the 2 to wait outside because the people might be scared if they saw demons. The prince suggested sending Sheaf, or Thief as he is called, since he could easily steal all they needed for free, especially since they had no money. Sheriff Rao was hesitant about the plan of his 2 companions because he was a sheriff. But Thief quickly acted, wearing a Santa Claus costume for added protection in case he got caught, which would allow him to make an excuse to escape. He returned shortly, having swiftly acquired supplies and hidden them. But most importantly, he found a perfect vehicle for them, a tank. The prince couldn't believe it at first, until Thief took them there himself. Sheriff Rao wondered why a modern post-war tank from the king's army was installed in that town. The prince liked it, so he immediately asked Thief to steal it, but Thief said it wasn't easy. Sheriff Rao decided to take action himself. He didn't care even if the worthless king owned the tank. He borrowed the hairspray they had used earlier. The 2 wondered what he planned to do with it, but he just told them to watch him in action. So, he descended the cliff and prepared to use the hairspray. He pulled out his pocket knife and slowly approached the tank, heading towards the bottom of the window where the guard was just sleeping. The 2 demons still couldn't understand what he was actually planning, until they saw Sheriff Rao puncture the can of hairspray and throw it through the window while yelling, "Poison gas." The people inside the tank panicked and quickly ran away. Objective complete. Sheriff Rao was then able to enter his new tank. He was pleased that he could operate it because the navigation controls hadn't changed from the old tanks he was accustomed to. The 3 soldiers wondered why the tank moved on its own without them inside. But it was too late when they realized that it had been stolen from them. The 2 demons were impressed by Rao's clever method of stealing the tank. When Sheriff Rao saw that the 3 foolish soldiers were still trying to chase him, he stopped driving. He left the driver's seat and climbed up to the tank's firing pod. He operated it and seemed to have no trouble with the controls. He fired at the ground where the 3 soldiers were standing. He only gave them a warning shot to scare them off and make them run away. The best part for Sheriff Rao was that the soldiers had no idea he was inside the tank. He let the 2 in and loaded their luggage onto the tank. They were happy because the tank came with plenty of water and food. Sheriff Rao was also pleased because, although the tank's guns weren't very powerful, it had 4 anti-grav stones. This meant it was capable of performing gravity control maneuvers. They quickly left, anticipating that the king's army would soon be after them. Sheriff Rao was very experienced in operating tanks due to his extensive experience from previous wars. What he did seemed easy, but was actually difficult to manage a tank. Naturally, it was very hot inside a tank, but it was even more so now because they were in the desert. So, they opened all the vents. They were now driving on a dried-up river road, and the sheriff was still puzzled about what the king's real intentions were for this place. Beelzebub got excited when Sheriff Rao let him try driving the tank. And it seemed easy enough for the prince, so he was the one who drove it heading south. Thief soon became envious, also wanting a turn at driving. Not long after, they encountered an enemy that quickly caught up to them, a plane. Sheriff Rao couldn't believe he was seeing a plane now because he thought the king had banned their production. When it got close, they clearly saw it bore the logo of the king's army itself. This meant that it was illegal for anyone to make planes, except for the military forces of the king himself. This was a big problem for them because they could no longer hide now that they had been seen by the enemy. But here's what happened next. The plane only sounded its siren briefly and then stopped in front of them. They began to wonder what it was really planning and whether it was aware that they had only stolen the tank. Sheriff Rao advised the two demons that they should not reveal themselves. Therefore, Sheriff Rao decided to momentarily emerge from the tank's top vent to respond to the airplane and salute the military. Finally, the commander inside the airplane spotted the person inside the tank. However, whenever they radioed Tank Unit 104, Sheriff Rao pretended their communication device was malfunctioning. Thus, the airplane left them to return later with one of the commander's men. This was a huge relief for our sheriff. They had managed to evade detection for now. He gave our Prince of Demons the new nickname, Bells, and hurried him to drive away. Now, instead of heading directly south, they needed to make a left turn eastward and avoid the sand to prevent leaving tank tracks. Just as the airplane had departed, they received a report from headquarters about the stolen tank. General R.A., their commander, was furious upon learning that the tank they had communicated with was actually stolen military property. Consequently, he ordered his military staff to quickly go back and pursue Tank 104. Luckily, while on the move, Beelzebub spotted a rocky cave, and they temporarily hid underneath it. According to Sheriff Rao, as long as they stayed there until nightfall, they would be safe. That's what he thought, until they were shocked to hear the airplane approaching them again. Sheriff Rao realized that their tank had a transmitter that the military could track. But it was too late. The airplane had spotted them and began firing upon them. The tank's sturdy steel construction was able to withstand the shower of bullets, though the sound of bullet impacts inside was loud. Sheriff Rao again instructed Beelzebub to drive away from the rocky shed, while he climbed into the firing pod to return fire. He told the demons to cover their ears while he's focused on targeting the plane, intending to deliver a powerful double shot. The airplane was hit. Suddenly, steam burst out from its large holes. Sheriff Rao was surprised to learn that the lower tank of the airplane contained water. And General R.A. was surprised that the tank thief knew how to operate a cannon. General R.A.'s response was to drop the water tank and position directly above Tank 104 to drop bombs on them, and to prevent being targeted by the cannon again. Knowing their intentions when they flew above, Sheriff Rao told the prince to expertly dodge the falling bombs. General R.A. instructed his men to carefully watch the tank's movements to ensure a bomb would hit them next. Meanwhile, inside the tank, Sheriff Rao knew they couldn't survive by dodging forever. So, he told Thief to turn on and maximize the tank's anti-gravity stones to lighten it, hoping they could tilt the tank just enough to angle a clear shot at the airplane. However, even with all anti-gravity units at maximum, the tank still weighed 1,562 kilos. But Beelzebub said they could manage this weight. So, they immediately exited to lift the front of the tank before the next bomb could hit. And astonishingly, the physical strength of these demons was immense. Rao was amazed at their strength, but more importantly, they provided him with a clear shot towards the sky. Boom! Direct hit. The airplane was hit again. Thus, General Ra had no choice but to retreat for an emergency landing. It was only a momentary celebration for our heroes, but a win is still a win. They continued their journey, with Thief now in charge of driving. Sheriff Rao now understood that the reason there was a tank in the town they came from was because the army was guarding a water tank airplane there. This meant the south was a strategic point for the king, and it was their source of water. The prince speculated that perhaps the king had preempted their goal of finding the lake from which the water finches originated. But giving up would waste their efforts, so they decided to continue their search. Suddenly, Beelzebub, with his sharp ears, heard voices from a radio hidden in a hanging uniform. Sheriff listened to the army's conversation and heard important information, so he had Thief turn off the tank's engine to listen more clearly. They heard that Commander Zayu of the king's army was scolding someone over 600 million yen worth of damages from the stolen tank and the damaged airplane. Sheriff Rao knew Commander Zayu, an extremely old commander now confined to a floating robotic lift. He assumed the stolen tank was heading to the king's army's water source, so he sent the remaining 4 tanks there to guard it, with orders to kill on sight. General Ra agreed with the order and was picked up by aircraft number 2. General Ra was excited about the impending action, confident that their adversaries would put up a fight. This was both good and bad news for our heroes. Good news: their suspicion about the water finches coming from the south was correct. Bad news: the king had taken control of all the water there. Sheriff Rao was troubled by the king's army's excessive guarding, suggesting they were protecting a highly classified top secret. The prince voiced his excitement for the escalating danger of their mission. However, Sheriff Rao and Thief did not share the prince's enjoyment, especially since Sheriff was sure they would now be branded public enemy number 1 by Zayu on the news. The king was terrified and panicked when General Zayu informed him about the rogue stolen tank planning to attack their reservoir. However, he assured the king that General Ra could kill them before they got close. Plus, they had a strong backup plan to use the public to finish them off. Their only problem now was they had no idea about the identity of the thieves. The trio stopped to eat and recuperate. They heard from the TV inside the tank that the news program had started, ready to hear the bad news about themselves. According to the news, an unknown group of saboteurs had stolen a military tank to steal a large amount of water and cause chaos in several villages. The prince was furious when he heard the army was asking the public for help to track them down, claiming it was for the public's own good. And to make matters worse, there was now a bounty on their heads, dead or alive, worth 3 million yen. Sheriff Rao had not expected them to be made public enemy number 1. They had no choice but to find the spring as proof to avoid being branded as villains. Thief suggested they call off the mission and return home before the army and the public could identify them. But Sheriff was certain backing out would only lead to their demise. They were way too deep in, and it's too late to go back. Fortunately, Beelzebub was a fast driver, shortening their supposed 5-day round trip. As long as the prince kept the tank moving quickly, they could reach the south by tomorrow. However, a big problem was the village Sheriff Rao used to live in, which they would pass on the way. He considered it might be safer to leave the tank near there and then see what happens next. Thief thought if that was their plan, he could steal a normal vehicle for them to use instead. But first, they prepared to sleep through the night, exhausted from the day's events. Thief and the prince learned from Sheriff Rao that it had been 30 years since he had lived in the south. Thief mentioned it had also been 30 years since the king's army destroyed the village of the Pitchy people, who had lived in the south. He thought it was a foolish move by the kingdom. Sheriff Rao disagreed, asking why it was wrong for the kingdom to stop the Pitchy, who planned to destroy all of Sandland. Thief revealed the Pitchy were actually building a machine capable of producing water, not a weapon of mass destruction. Sheriff was stunned by this revelation and couldn't believe what Thief was telling him. The king had destroyed the Pitchy village, where they were building a machine to provide unlimited water for everyone. The king pretended to pay them with aquanium for their machine, but instead sent tanks to destroy them all, using the aquanium intended as payment to explode the entire village. Shocked by the truth, he confessed to the two that he was the former commanding general who led the tank attack for the king's army that day. The massive explosion was an accident, killing all his men and even affecting his own village nearby. Unaware that the king's army knew he survived, Sheriff Rao had been hiding ever since. They couldn't understand why the king would send General Rao and his tanks if the plan was to destroy everything anyway. Sheriff Rao suspected Commander Zayu orchestrated this because they had long disagreed on their methods and they were quite vocal about it. Can't really blame the two happy-go-lucky demons who just couldn't quite grasp the seriousness of Sheriff Rao's conflicted feelings. Eventually, all of the three fell asleep. But in the middle of the night, Sheriff Rao suddenly woke up and noticed that the prince was no longer in his bed. Then he found him standing on top of a cliffside nearby. The prince can feel that they are about to face numerous fierce battles, so to prepare, he is absorbing some power from the night moon. At break of dawn, the two demons woke up to the noise coming from within their tank. It turns out Sheriff Rao had started the engine early to depart while the early morning was still cool. This also prevented the tank's engine from overheating. If they were still sleepy, they could continue to sleep during the journey. When Beelzebub approached the driver's seat, he saw Sheriff Rao's lucky charm. Sheriff had attached a magazine cutout next to him, showcasing the body of Sexy Terrier, who was once a famous movie star. Thief teased the sheriff about this and even called him a dirty old man. The prince understood that Sheriff Rao no longer had any intentions of abandoning their tank. Now that he was using a lucky charm, it meant he was planning something big and dangerous. This was due to the 30-year-old information from Thief, which Sheriff Rao had only learned about the previous night and now sought revenge on the king's army. Sheriff Rao said his top priority was still to find the lake, but he wouldn't hesitate to attack anyone from the king's army who stood in his way. He wished to drop the two off at the nearest village because, as a sheriff, he was the only one responsible for finding the lake. However, the prince reminded him of their deal to find the lake together. Moreover, the prince had absorbed the power of the night the previous evening, ready to fight. Thief was initially reluctant to join, but, fearing to go back alone, prepared for the upcoming challenge. Rao drove the tank quickly to cover as much ground as possible early on. However, the noise of the tank attracted a suspicious-looking trio, Pike, Papa, and Shark, who seemed to have plans to target them. It turns out Pike had the power to see great distances in perfect detail with his eyes. And he even managed to draw a detailed sketch of the sheriff. With this new information, Papa immediately sold the sketch to the media, realizing their high-profile target could bring in a significant reward from the government. Shark, with his incredible speed, quickly returned with the 200,000 yen reward for the picture, and they immediately checked the news on TV. The media quickly reported a sketch of one of the perpetrators' faces, which shocked the trio. The public now identified the 61-year-old Rao, leaving our sheriff bewildered. He couldn't understand how the enemy recognized him without anyone getting close enough to see his face, and without any cameras capturing him. Moreover, a vital piece of information about his past was publicly announced. His true identity was the legendary prodigy, General Shiba, a national hero in their history books. This revelation shocked everyone. It was now officially confirmed that he had survived the massive explosion during Sand Age Year 19 in the Pitchy People's area, which also destroyed his former home village and killed his wife, Sexy Terrier. Thief was profoundly shocked by this revelation and regretted calling Rao a dirty old man. Commander Zayu couldn't believe Shiba was still alive, causing him and the king to sweat with fear. Thus, he urgently summoned General Ra to determine Shiba's true intentions. The king was restless, pestering Commander Zayu because they thought they had killed General Shiba long ago. Meanwhile, Papa's rage reignited upon hearing General Shiba's name again, believing Shiba had pursued their rebellion. Pike told Papa that he saw 4 more tanks heading their way, besides Sheriff's tank from earlier. One of these tanks contained General Ra, who was nervous now facing a legend. Papa wondered how the king's army tanks had found them and became furious upon discovering Shark was wearing a tracking device disguised as a souvenir necklace given to him by the media office. So now, he woke Guppy up to assist them. This big guy is the human tank of their group that's called the Swimmers. Sheriff Rao managed to call and establish contact with the main line of the news office. He introduced himself as former General Shiba and requested that they broadcast their call to the public because he had something important to say to the people. The media agreed and provided Sheriff with the live TV line. General Ra temporarily halted the tanks to clearly hear what General Shiba had to say. Sheriff Rao confessed to stealing a tank, but denied the news report from the previous day that they had attacked a village. Sheriff Rao also seized this opportunity to share his true intention of finding the Phantom Lake to ensure a sufficient water supply for the people. The king and General Zayu, clueless about the lake referred to, were surprised. Sheriff Rao promised the people that he would report any water sources he found and would return the borrowed tank to the army after his quest, on the condition that they do not interfere with his mission. Following this, he issued an enraged warning to General Zayu, revealing that he knew the truth behind the explosion that occurred 30 years ago. He vowed never to forgive Zayu, who was now terrified of him. The news office wanted to ask Sheriff Rao about his statements, but he abruptly ended the call. Zayu warned the news media against publicly allowing a criminal to speak, threatening them for their actions. The king was concerned because two top-secret pieces of information could be leaked by Shiba to the public: their secret water source and their orchestration of the giant explosion in Pitchy village. Zayu ordered General Ra to kill on sight, driven by fear and anger towards former General Shiba. Before ending the call, Ra inquired about the truth behind the explosion mentioned by Shiba, as his own father had died in that explosion. Zayu dismissed Ra's question, suggesting Shiba was merely trying to confuse them. Papa advised Shark and Pike not to trust anyone claiming to do something good for all people, though he himself harbored anger towards Zayu. Papa instructed Guppy to fire a cannon between Shiba's tank and Ra's tanks, prompting the two sides to battle each other first, with the Swimmers finishing them off later. The Swimmers' plan worked, preparing both sides for battle against each other. Beelzebub noticed 4 enemy tanks, his eyes sharper than using scopes, indicating the king's army had sent all available tanks against them. General Ra strategized to attack Sheriff Rao's tank head-on with 2 tanks, while the other 2 would flank from behind, knowing they had the advantage of radar. However, Beelzebub, emerging from the tank's top vent, spotted Pike, both having keen eyesight. The Swimmers were puzzled by Shiba's alliance with the Prince of Demons. Papa's comrades were afraid, recalling a past encounter with the prince who had single-handedly defeated them. Yet, Papa told them not to fear, as they were the greatest criminals in Sandland, leading them to prudently hide and watch the battle unfold. Sheriff Rao ordered Thief to stop the tank in the middle of the desert upon spotting 2 tanks to their right. The prince entered to inquire why they had stopped in such a visible spot. Rao explained they were not easily seen or targeted by the enemy tanks due to their positioning against the light. General Ra reprimanded his tanks to move, but it was too late as Sheriff Rao had already spotted them. Rao hit the critical parts of the tanks, causing significant damage and immobilizing them, leaving General Ra in disbelief at how quickly and easily General Shiba had defeated them. They realized that the king's army's tanks hiding behind large rocks to their left are using radar to their disadvantage, necessitating drawing them out into an open area. Beelzebub decided to stand on a cliff of a high rock in front of their tank to clearly see the exact location of the remaining 2 tanks. Using their tank as a platform, he jumped high onto the top of the tall rock, impressing Sheriff Rao with the strength of this Prince of Demons. Now that Beelzebub had reached a higher altitude, he could easily spot the 2 enemy tanks. He noticed that General Ra's tanks had their cannons aimed at Sheriff Rao, so he immediately relayed this information to him. Subsequently, they, along with Thief, took cover behind a large rock. It was perfect timing. Had they been even slightly late in dodging, they would likely have been destroyed by the heavy cannons. Thief then drove the tank again, but this time Sheriff Rao directed him towards the right, where the prince was located. He was also surprised to find out that he had indeed heard the prince speaking to him earlier, despite the great distance between them. He wasn't going insane. Beelzebub indeed had the ability to communicate telepathically, but usually only with demons. It was his first attempt at trying this with a human. The prince also admitted to Sheriff Rao that, in addition to this, he could read minds. However, he hadn't mastered this skill, so he could only see the surface level of memories and hadn't managed to read that he was indeed General Sheba. They encountered the two tanks they had immobilized earlier again and circled around them. Soldiers from the king's army emerged from the tank, nervously facing General Sheba. But upon Sheba's emergence, he gave the soldiers a salute that took them by surprise. Some of them even saluted back when General Sheba inquired if any of them were injured. The soldiers of the king's army were puzzled as to why they saluted back and couldn't bring themselves to fire at him. Beelzebub confirmed to his allies that they were visible to the enemy tank's radar, which awaited a clear shot at them from their position. With this information, Sheriff Rao swiftly instructed Thief to stop the tank at the right moment to avoid enemy fire. This maneuver worked, allowing them to dodge the heavy cannons. General R.A. couldn't understand how Sheba had predicted his moves. Sheriff Rao and Thief quickly moved away before the enemy could reload. Then, Sheriff Rao suddenly instructed Thief to reverse at full speed for a fierce counterattack maneuver. They stopped because the enemies had temporarily retreated. General R.A. was thankful that none of his men had sustained any injuries. He was highly impressed with General Sheba for reading their tactics well and outplaying them all without harming anyone. Indeed, what his father had told him about General Sheba being a class apart was true. While Sheriff Rao was contemplating how to defeat the enemy's strongest tank, they were surprised when General R.A. himself emerged from the tank. He earnestly asked Sheriff Rao if he was indeed searching for a water source for everyone. Sheriff Rao also exited the tank to speak with him earnestly. He was searching for another water source because the water sold by the king was too expensive. Most people couldn't afford it, and his villagers were dying of thirst. He asked R.A. if he knew anything about Phantom Lake and what secrets the king's army was hiding about it. R.A. apologized, explaining that as a general, he couldn't disclose the information he knew to Sheba. But he had another question for Sheba. What did he mean by the truth behind the massive explosion in Pitchy village? The swimmers thought that General R.A.'s army had surrendered to Sheba. R.A. introduced himself to Sheba as the son of Officer Apo, who had worked under his command, and he wanted to know how his father had died. Sheba remembered Apo and even recalled showing him a baby picture of his son, R.A., once. To better explain what had happened, he called over Thief to share the details with R.A. However, the humans were shocked to learn that the information came from a demon, struggling to believe that General Sheba trusted their kind. As they argued, Beelzebub descended from above, furious at the humans' prejudice against their demons. Sheba supported the two demons, stating he trusted them more than any human. Demons do not kill a single person when they steal water from the supplies of the corrupt king of humans. Even though the offensive force of the demons is strong and they are capable of conquering the entire kingdom, they still do not wish to do so. The prejudice of humans against demons is misplaced. But before R.A. could hear what he wanted to know about the Pitchy people from Sheba, they were attacked by the swimmers with a powerful cannon shot by Guppy. Beelzebub immediately acted upon noticing an incoming large projectile. He picked up a large rock and threw it forcefully upwards. This hit the incoming projectile, causing it to explode in midair, thereby saving them all while Papa had already run away in fear. They were all puzzled about where that powerful attack had come from, as there were no other tanks in the vicinity that could have launched it. Using his sharp eyesight, Beelzebub saw the swimmers running away. While everyone was irritated by the criminals' double-crossing, General R.A. admitted that they had used a tracking device given by the news office to follow the location of Tank 104. The prince quickly pursued the cowards. Hard as it was for General R.A. to admit, he acknowledged that the Prince of Demons had saved their lives at that moment. Because of this, General R.A. himself humbled himself before them, begging Thief to tell him what happened in Pitchy village 30 years ago. Thief began the story by revealing to General R.A. that the Pitchy people were not building a weapon but a water-making machine. Meanwhile, Beelzebub was close to catching up with those he was chasing. The swimmers were in tears, fearing they stood no chance against the strength of the Prince of Demons. Pike, being at the very back of the four, was the first to be slapped by the prince. Then came Guppy, whom the prince even managed to lift and body slam powerfully onto the ground. His next target was Papa. When he caught up with Papa, Papa challenged him to a duel first. Papa shouted loudly and flexed his large muscles. But a single, gentle straight right punch from the prince quickly brought him down, prompting his surrender. Before the prince moved away from him, he asked if the prince truly believed they could find a new lake. The prince simply said he believed in Sheriff Rao, and if Sheriff Rao believed they could find a lake, he would support him. Papa asked if his children could swim in the lake they would find. The swimmers they were. Yet his children had never experienced swimming because they were born in a time when the entire Sandland was a desert. The prince merely told him they could do whatever they wished with it. As Beelzebub was about to catch the last member, he activated his sprinting powers. Their chase reached speeds of over 100 miles per hour. Eventually, the prince caught up with Shark, the swimmer's fastest sprinter, and slapped him as well. The prince was out of breath from the long run to catch them, and now he was worried because he also needed to return quickly to Thief and Rao. But he faced a new problem. A sandstorm was approaching. The main issue was that he could not find any shelter. So, when he saw a desert bluff, he hurried towards it. Being small, he was easily blown away by the strong wind, so he was lucky to find a cave upon reaching the desert bluff. After taking a deep breath, he was curious about the mysterious source of light inside the cave. Upon exiting the other end of the cave, he was amazed to see a clean, fresh, and untouched lake surrounded by rainforest trees along with various animals and plants. Thief finished recounting everything to General R.A. He now understood that both Zayu and the king targeted Sheba's tank brigade and the Pitchy people's water-making machine to ensure the king's water monopoly remained unchallenged. Sheriff Rao admitted to him that he too had been skeptical of the truth at first but later realized that Thief's story made more sense than the lies spread by the king and Zayu to everyone. Firstly, the Pitchy people are peaceful and creating large weapons is against their nature. He knew General Zayu was a villain, but R.A. and Sheba had not anticipated that he would go as far as sacrificing the entire tank brigade for the king's selfish objectives. Zayu was indeed a villain, but the important thing was that the truth was now known. Thus, Thief and his companions borrowed Tank 104 again for their benevolent mission. General R.A. decided to conceal the truth and provide a cover story in their mission report. They pretended to have almost captured Sheba, but Tank 104 managed to escape again due to interference from a criminal group known as the Swimmers. General R.A. wanted to speak personally with the king before approaching Commander Zayu. Thief expressed his frustration to Sheriff Rao, feeling slighted when humans found it hard to believe his stories. Sheriff Rao, however, told him he was impressed by his driving skills, noting that for a novice, Thief possessed the prowess of a pro. They then located the prince, who had managed to contact Sheriff Rao via telepathy. Without hesitation, the prince revealed that he had found the Phantom Lake. Sheriff Rao was astonished, his face showing the most surprised expression he had ever had. Beelzebub informed them that he would help them reach the Phantom Lake. The prince leaped to the top of the desert bluff, noticing that the sandstorm had subsided. He saw Tank 104 and gave them directions to his location. General R.A. called the king to provide a mission report and, more importantly, to verify the truth behind Sheba's accounts. However, the king became furious when Ra mentioned his involvement in the Pitchy people's demise. The king's nervous reaction to the topic led him to quickly dismiss the conversation, removing any doubts Ra had about the truth. Sheriff Rao and Thief were amazed as Beelzebub led them into the desert bluff, revealing the hidden Phantom Lake. This site had remained undiscovered for years, with the prohibition against airplanes making it impossible to spot without being led there. This likely mirrored the king's own water source, which explained his ban on airplane use. With this discovery, Beelzebub and his demons found a new home, and humans gained a new free water source. They even spotted a water finch catching fish in the lake, further confirming Sheriff Rao's initial suspicions. The prince, noticing someone in the distance, quickly went to investigate. Using his keen sense of smell, he was surprised to find a small clan of Pitchy people survivors living quietly. It took a while before the prince returned to Sheriff Rao, who had grown impatient waiting. The delay was due to the prince sharing with the Pitchy people survivors the truth about what happened to their village 30 years ago. The two were surprised by their new discovery, and Sheriff Rao immediately apologized to Beelzebub. But before he could suggest to the prince that they perhaps leave the Pitchy people and the discovered lake behind, it turned out they were already in agreement on the matter, so the prince readily agreed. Such is the kindness of our Prince of Demons. They even decided to return someday with clothes and food. Now, their only choice was to find the king's water source and bring down the corrupt government and military. Meanwhile, Commander Zayu was reprimanding General Ra in a call for upsetting the king earlier. However, Ra pretended the call line was unstable and claimed he couldn't understand Zayu. Zayu panicked upon realizing that ex-General Sheba had not yet been captured. Then, Ra decided to call a line that Tank 104, along with Sheba and the two demons who were once again arguing over who was the better driver, could hear. He talked to himself out loud, so Sheba and the others could hear, and on the phone, he gave the correct path to the king's army water source, mentioning that he had ordered the patrolling troops in the area to return under his commands. General Sheba warmly thanked him, encouraged that there were still good people within the army he once belonged to. It was time to rush to the king's army water source. Soon, they found the dry riverbed Ra referred to, leading them towards the southern water source. Back at the king's palace, there was concern because they couldn't contact General Ra or any of his troops. They also learned that their battalion was attacked yesterday by the Swimmers, who were defeated by Sheba's ally, a powerful red demon. Fear was evident on Zihiu's face because he recognized Beelzebub and knew the demon's strength. The king couldn't believe Sheba and Beelzebub were working together, but Zayu seemed to have an idea why. He called Dr. Pose to prepare their powerful secret weapon known as Insect Man. However, the doctor warned that it was experimental and could attack civilians. So, Commander Zayu had it equipped with a remote-controlled bomb for the meantime. Meanwhile, Tank 104 had traveled south but still hadn't seen any sign of the water source, except for lookouts posted around. As they got closer, they spotted a large military structure. They disembarked from the tank to inspect it personally. Upon closer inspection, they realized it was a huge dam. They climbed the cliff beside the dam, and from there, they saw a vast sea filled with water. All this time, they thought the rivers and lakes of Sandland had dried up due to the war, but it turned out the king had built a dam, cutting off the sea that fed the rivers. Humans, especially Zayu, have a tremendous capacity for evil to do this. Now, the plan was to first destroy the entire dam and then confront Zayu. Speaking of the devil, Zayu himself was on his way to Sheba and the prince, bringing along Insect Man. According to Sheriff Rao, to destroy the dam, they needed to concentrate all of Tank 104's firepower on a single spot on the dam. But before they could return to the tank, Zayu arrived in person at their location. The two rival generals greeted each other first, with each of them believing the other is already dead. Zayu was annoyed with Sheba for always disrupting his peaceful life. But Sheba argued that the peace Zayu spread was not true peace. As the two continued to argue, the two demons worried about the terrifying weapon Zayu brought. He released the cage of Insect Man, which opened upon hitting the ground. Zayu then issued an attack order, and our heroes prepared to face this new, terrifying enemy. The Insect Man steadily approached Beelzebub. According to Zayu, this was the king's army's ultimate weapon that's specifically built to destroy the demons. The Insect Man and the Prince of Demons locked eyes, the latter admitting that this foe was formidable. Yet, as a demon, he remained confident in facing it, assuring Sheriff Rao there was nothing to worry about. The prince graciously offered the Insect Man a chance to flee early, but received a powerful punch in response. The force of the impact sent him tumbling. The prince struggled to stand and pretended the blow hadn't hurt him. Sheba worried for Beelzebub, knowing the Insect Man was the type of weapon designed to eliminate anything alive and breathing it encountered, including Sheriff Rao. The prince, however, delivered a powerful missile dropkick to save Sheriff Rao. Because of its high defense, the Insect Man quickly recovered. Beelzebub urged Sheriff Rao and Thief to retreat to their tank while he faced the enemy alone. As they ran towards the tank, Zayu fired at them from above. Sheriff Rao counterfired with his handgun, hitting Zayu. He had kept the gun's loaded state a secret from Thief, as he hadn't fully trusted them at that earlier time. Meanwhile, the prince struggled against the Insect Man, only managing to dodge some of its attacks. The hits he did take were powerful, but fortunately, he could quickly recover. Thankfully, Sheba and Thief were now aboard the tank. The prince's quick healing ability meant he couldn't be defeated by the Insect Man unless continuously attacked. The prince's powerful uppercut didn't affect the Insect Man, thanks to its high defense stats, hurting the prince's hands instead. The Insect Man counterattacked with a powerful right straight kick, sending the prince flying. The prince was almost breathless after the kick, but shrugged it off and taunted his opponent again. Zayu smiled, seeing the Insect Man nearing victory over Beelzebub. But then, Tank 104 fired its cannon, directly hitting the Insect Man. Beelzebub thanked them for the help, but informed Sheriff Rao that even the tank's cannon couldn't truly harm their enemy. Zayu was pleased with the Insect Man's performance, while Sheriff Rao worried for Beelzebub. Thief suggested they wait a bit longer to see the prince's next move. Sheriff Rao, seeing the prince in peril, doubted Thief's advice, fearing the prince would die if not assisted. Thief urged Sheriff Rao to trust their prince. Sheriff Rao's anxiety spiked upon seeing the prince wounded by the Insect Man's claws. Thief remained steadfast, insisting the prince had yet to reveal his true power. Zihia's evil laughter echoed as he saw the wounded and unconscious prince. Many underestimated Beelzebub due to his kindness, not realizing he was the most feared demon in the world. Once he unleashed the power of the night within him, he became an incredibly terrifying demon. The Insect Man continued to assault him, but he refused to die and managed to stand, surprising both the Insect Man and Zayu. Enraged, the prince was now in a serious state, which Thief remarked was a rare sight, suggesting they distanced themselves a bit from the battle. The battle heated up, and Beelzebub, now emitting a powerful aura, grew increasingly furious. Sheriff Rao questioned Thief about their considerable distance from the fight, to which Thief replied that any closer, and they might find themselves in danger. Zayu shouted at the Insect Man to stop observing and continue the attack. The Insect Man resumed with a right kick followed by a flurry of punch combinations at Beelzebub, who seemed only to be angered further, unaffected by the attacks. The prince retaliated with a powerful left hook, sending the Insect Man flying a great distance and digging a trench in the earth upon landing. But before the Insect Man could rise, the prince very rapidly repositioned behind him and executed an immensely powerful stomp, creating a shockwave felt even by Zayu and Sheba. When the dust settled, the Insect Man was seen sprawled on the ground. Sheriff Rao was astounded by the prince's power, while Zayu was left speechless, seeing his insect man immobilized. Beelzebub attempted to speak to his downed opponent. As a last resort, Zayu activated the remote control bomb that's inside the insect man, intending to blow up the prince along with it. The explosion was massive, prompting Sheriff Rao to scream in concern for Beelzebub. Furious, he immediately fired at Zayu, who was airborne but missed as Zayu dodged. Zayu flew towards Sheba, positioning himself directly above Tank 104, a perfect spot to avoid Sheba's targeting and drop another bomb on them. They were helpless, as Thief couldn't lift the tank alone, and Beelzebub was immobile, not fully healed from the explosion's wounds. Unexpectedly, a large projectile penetrated Zihia's bodysuit, causing his armor to malfunction and sending him crashing down to explode on impact. Turning around, Sheba saw that it was General Araya's tank that had fired the cannon at Zayu. Araya apologized for stealing Sheba's chance for revenge, but Sheba acknowledged that Zayu was a mutual enemy since he had also killed Araya's father. The fully healed Beelzebub rejoined them, and Thief was relieved to see his prince safe. The prince saluted General Araya in gratitude for his assistance. Now, Sheba borrowed Araya's tank, equipped with their most powerful cannon, planning to use it to destroy the king's army's water source dam, which caused drought in all of Sandland. Tank 101 has already fired at the middle section of the outer wall of the dam. After several shots, they are left with only 4 74mm shells, leading to widespread concern about their ability to destroy the dam now. Sheriff Rao temporarily ceased firing since only 3 shells remained in the tank, emphasizing the need to conserve ammunition. While they were contemplating whether the cannons of weaker tanks could assist, a third-party cannon unexpectedly struck the target's weak spot. General Araya and Sheba were surprised to see water beginning to leak through the small hole they had made. Thus, they quickly moved away to avoid being caught in the strong wave that was imminent. Eventually, the weak point collapsed entirely, releasing water from within the dam. The water flow intensified rapidly, sweeping a small military buggy below. In moments, the entire structure of the dam sections blocking the water flow from the sea to the river was destroyed, replenishing the river after many years of drought. Mission accomplished. But who was the third party that fired the cannon? It was the swimmers. Beelzebub and Araya were impressed. Who would have thought they had a powerful cannon, considering their ragtag group? Recognizing the danger this posed to residents near the riverbed, General Araya immediately contacted the news office to announce a public evacuation warning. He also mentioned on TV and radio that the heroes who restored water for everyone were former General Sheba, along with the Demon's Thief and Beelzebub, the Demon Prince. He led the announcement, stating that the king would reward the heroes generously and donate half of his wealth to feed the hungry citizens. He also promised to soon reveal the truth behind the tragedy that occurred 30 years ago to the Pitchy people. Araya's actions have cornered the king into sharing his wealth. According to Sheba, Araya is the best candidate for the next supreme commander of the army. However, Araya feels guilty about his past misdeeds under late Commander Zayu and wishes to retire early. Why doesn't Sheba return to the military, given his deserving status? But Sheba is too old and prefers to rest. Instead, Araya should seize this opportunity to ensure peace throughout Sandland. Sheriff Rao borrowed the tank for one last trip, taking the prince and thief home. After a little more than a week, Sheriff Rao visited his demon friend's town again, this time bringing a new vehicle. Beelzebub greeted him, explaining that it was his old car, repaired by the bandits they encountered on their journey. They kept their promise to return to Phantom Lake, bringing clothes and food to the Pitchy people survivors. The demons told Prince Beelzebub to summon them if needed, though they knew he lacked summoning magic skills. On their new journey, Beelzebub and Thief took turns driving, even seeing the swimmers finally enjoying the water. And so concludes our short but fulfilling journey with Beelzebub, Sheriff Rao, and Thief.